Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Nice to see a few more faces today. It's now 9:30 and time for me to open this hearing session on Matter 5, Other Housing Requirements. For those of you who haven't met us, I'm Caroline Malloy and this is Dr. Rachel Bust, the inspectors jointly appointed to hold the examination into the Lewisham local plan. Before we begin, can everyone hear me okay at the back there? Just in terms of a few housekeeping matters, could everyone please make sure that their phones are switched to silent, including any other devices such as laptops, while the hearing is in session, so we don't get any unnecessary interruptions. In terms of using the microphones, if you can please make sure that your microphone is muted until you are invited to speak, just so we can avoid any disturbance from any unnecessary background noise and feedback, that kind of thing. I think because of the positioning of the mics, a bit further away, certainly for me, if you could just make sure you can lean forward into the mic so that everybody here. Particularly as we're being live streamed, so just to so you're aware that we are being live streamed. Does anyone have any objections to that? So in terms of the procedure today, the hearing session will take the form of a structured discussion, which we shall lead based on the agenda, matters, issues and questions. Just to check, does everyone have a copy of the agenda? I believe there was some on table outside as you came in. We will try and bring everybody in at the relevant point, but if you do wish to make a point, I'm sure those of you who've been involved in examinations all will know to put their nameplate up on edge, and just so we're aware that you want to speak, and we'll try and bring you in when we can. Just to remind you of the need to speak through ourselves rather than across the table, otherwise it can get a little bit confusing. Just to remind you also that everyone taking part in the discussion should have provided all of the evidence in your original representations. Hearing sessions are not an opportunity to introduce any further evidence, and if you do so, then we'll have to be quite strict in stopping you. So just a reminder really that any comments you do make should relate back to those original representations. Does anyone have any questions at this stage in terms of the procedure? Can I ask the Council just to run through housekeeping matters, please, in terms of fire escapes, were there any fire alarms planned, refreshments?
Yeah, there are no fire alarms planned today, and the fire escapes are clearly marked, and our refuge point is on the Broadway next to Costa Cafe, if people know, hopefully that is. The toilets and facilities are out to the left. Tea and coffees and water as you came in.
If I could, inspectors, just very briefly reiterate the point about not having more than one microphone live at one time. We had some technical difficulties with broadcasting yesterday's session electronically, which were primarily caused by more than one microphone being switched on simultaneously. So please do be aware of that. Many thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, do try and remind us if we're not doing that. So you kind of get involved in the discussion sometimes and forget about microphones, so do please remind us. So without further ado, can I ask the participants to introduce yourselves, starting with the Council, please?
Good morning, ma'am. Arms, plural. I'm a new face for today. My name is Andrew Fraser-Urquhart, King's Counsel. I'm here representing, obviously, our team's contribution, although you're obviously very familiar with them already from from 2 days worth of hearings. But that's who I am, and that's the role that I will take. One might say the ringmark circus.
David Syme, I'm the head of strategic planning here at Lewisham.
Good morning. My name is Karol Jakubczyk. I'm the Planning Policy Manager here at Lewisham.
I'm Angela Stewart, Principal Policy Officer at Lewisham.
Good morning, I'm Nick Fenwick, I'm the Director of Planning here at Lewisham.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Smith.
Chris Wheaton from Quad, also representing Landsec.
Sorry, can I just ask you to repeat your name? I didn't quite catch
Sorry,
it.
Chris Wheaton, W-H-E-A-T-O-N, also representing Landsec.
Morning, Chris Benham from Knight Frank and representing Lewisham House.
Sophie Carty, Knight Frank, also representing.
I just ask you to repeat your surname, please, so I can get it.
Carty.
And I'm Mr. Alan Hall. As I said, I'm no longer part of the Lewisham Circus. I'm no longer a councillor. I'm here now in a private capacity. Thanks.
Thank you, and welcome to everybody to the hearing sessions who have been involved before. I am conscious that we have quite a lot to get through this morning. It's quite a packed agenda. So just to highlight that there may be cases where we don't have any further questions on issues, in which case we'll move on. If you think of moving on and you do wish to make a point, do put your hand up, put your toe blowing up. But just to be aware that I'm going to try and keep things moving today, because we don't want to be here too late. I was reminded that there's a rather important match this evening, so I don't want to be holding anyone back from watching that. So, right. So without further ado. In terms of the first item on the agenda, and housing choice and mix, I asked in the MIQs what is evidence in relation to housing choice and mix, and I've read the council's statement on that, which really just cross-references to the SHMA. So just for the benefit of the examination, can the council just say what the key headlines are in terms of the need for certain dwelling mix and requirement for particular types of units and dwellings, unit sizes, that kind of thing? Just key headlines.
Yes, well, I'm going to ask Angela Stewart to take that on, please.
So our policy HO1, based on meeting a range of housing needs across the borough, and this has been predicated on the evidence that we found in the SHMA. I think one of the very useful charts that can be found in the SHMA, I think, is figure 4.3, and that demonstrates very clearly that lower level.
Can I just ask you to clarify what page numbers on, so we can all get to that table? On an electronic version. Page number.
Yeah.
It's page 74, ma'am. EB 60.
Give us a moment to get there. Is everybody there? Yep.
This demonstrates quite clearly that both local, lower quartile and median income levels find it very difficult to actually purchase or rent some of the tenures housing that are available in the borough. And in fact, the only truly affordable solution is social rent, followed almost by London affordable rent and affordable rent. Once you start getting up to the market rent levels and shared ownership and a variety of other housing products, we are well above the levels that the majority of our population can achieve. Based on that, we've got a policy which focuses on providing inclusive and mixed communities. And to do that, it introduces a range of measures. One is to have affordable housing at a 50% level, and that is for genuinely affordable housing. We do have a local definition of that, and I think we'll probably come on to that a bit later on. And also the SHMA found that because of the acute need for affordable housing in the borough, we do have a target mix of 70% social rent and 30% intermediate. That has actually been carried over from the core strategy, so that's not a new policy for us. We did work, obviously the London plan provides direction on that, and you can amend the last 40% to however you feel at the local level. But for us, we felt that we needed to go to the maximum amount of social rent. Another thing that we found from the SHMA was that there is a need for family housing in the borough. This has also had an impact on the HMO, which we'll come on to later on in the session as well. So our policy is clear that we are seeking family-sized accommodation as well as smaller accommodation. And generally, we do restrict solely studio or one-bed units, although there are some locations in the borough where we do accept that this is acceptable. And then finally, we acknowledge that it's not just about one type of house building. You can have self-build in the borough, and we do have a policy on that. We do support modular schemes as well. We've had a few of them developed in the borough. It's all about providing a mix, a variety for our residents.
Okay, thank you. That's a really helpful overview. The sort of evidence in the SHMA. We will be coming back to affordable housing, so we're just going to set that aside for a moment. In terms of dwelling mix, in terms of unit sizes and bedrooms, that sort of thing, the policy in terms of affordable housing proposed unit size is set out in table 7.1. Presumably that comes the evidence in the...
Yes, that's correct.
It's in the...
Take one moment to find. can be found in table 7.8, which is on page 124, schma. That sets out different types of tenure and also the number of bedrooms, proportion for each.
Okay, thank you. That table has been used really to derive table 7.1 in the policy itself and target unit.
Yes, that's correct. I think it felt that there was no need to specify a specific mix in the schma itself. What we did do in our policy is say that we look at it on a case-by-case basis to ensure that there is a good mix in terms of units.
Okay, I think you kind of preempted my next question, so we'll go straight there. I think in terms of the point that's been raised by participants, but the point I'd like to follow up, obviously table 7.8 does look at the mix of target mix of users in both terms of affordable and market housing. Clearly the policy HO1 sets out a descriptive mix in terms of affordable housing, but it doesn't go that far in relation to housing. I know from experience in working elsewhere, and the target unit size be included or referenced back to the schma, and then for developers to provide guidance for developers a certain unit mix in terms. Then if there's a justification with a different mix, then the case has to. And I would just like to explain with the council the reasons more. It would like to take a more case by case in terms of mix and where that approach has come.
If I may, Angela. Yes, I mean this is effectively a tried and tested approach that we have at the moment. I think on a case-by-case basis, particularly for the private, is particularly pertinent to London, where essentially the nature of the sites are very different, and the appropriate private mix is often defined by the location, public transport accessibility, the density and scale of development that we are collectively trying to achieve. I would note that it is quite difficult in the current private market to deliver 3-bedroom private market units, for example, both commercially but also in terms of selling those units, and the demand for them is often quite challenging and difficult. So really we look at this through the development management process on a case-by-case basis, and the working collaboratively with our development partners, we land on the correct solution for the area and for the location and for the type of development that we're trying to promote.
I think the participant, in terms of my question, MIQs, does the policy provide sufficient guidance to developers in terms of what they're expected to provide? Obviously, it can influence their negotiations on the price of land. So I think coming from the point of view, the fact it's certainty.
I mean, Ma'am, just to observe, and both to the participants, it's worth noting that, as far as we're aware, the only objection along these lines from the House Builders Federation, a very general approach, and the specific house builders all the time in this borough have not objected to this. So, clearly they don't feel it's difficulty.
It's you know, I obviously need to test the approach as well. It's not just a case of whether there are any objections, and it's you know, I need to test the evidence. We
Well, of course that's true, but one can usefully be guided by the response of those for whom this is thought to be a concern, and there's some regard ought to be paid to the nature and volume of patients, and in particular where there's an absence of objection. That is something which, in my submission, you're entitled to have regard to.
I think, you know, from my point of view, I just want to get to the bottom of the difference in approach between housing and housing. And I was wondering whether it may have been influenced in terms of viability as well, because obviously the changing the mix of housing on a site can influence viability. Well, I wondered if that played a role. I'm just trying to get behind the reason.
I mean, obviously, on a case-by-case basis, there is differences, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, again, what we find is, and again, I'm not speaking here for the development industry, but what we find when we're working with our development partners is that in terms of the commercial reality, in terms of the viability, and in terms of the demand for particular types of private units and larger private units, they are very costly to build and not viable, but B, they are not in demand, particularly flatted three-bedroom dwellings. And of course, the nature of Lewisham, and in terms of the urban nature and the densities, mean that we are often having to look at flatted accommodation. Now, that's not to say we don't push our development partners to try to provide that balanced and mixed communities. But you're absolutely right to note as well that we also have to have regard to the viability and the cross-subsidy of affordable housing, and that is where the council's most acute need is, particularly for those larger units. Those kind of affordable units. So there is that balance to be struck through the development management.
Again, you sort of preempted a question I had in my mind, but I would just like to explore a little bit in terms of the fact that we're looking at, and as you raised yesterday, we are looking at, high densities. How does that fit with the need to provide family housing? How does the council see that kind of marrying up, if you like, given that there is a need for a lot of the developments can be quite high density flats?
I think the council acknowledges that it is a challenge, and a challenge for Lewisham and a challenge for London more widely across the London housing market. We do have the benefit of having quite a lot of family housing within the borough in our established neighbourhoods and communities. We also have very good registered providers who are delivering affordable family-sized dwellings as well, such as Phoenix, to the south of the borough. And we are managing to incorporate family-sized dwellings within the high-density schemes that we have been approving. So, an example would be on the Leagate scheme, where we have got larger three-bed family-size apartments, but also housing within there in maisonettes. So that's the negotiation and discussions that we're having with our private developers.
And presumably it's something that the council monitors as part of your monitoring report in terms of, how effective the council's being in securing housing through development schemes.
That's correct. We prepare an annual monitoring report every year, usually in December. That looks at the completions and often looks at the split in terms of location of the units and the type of unit, tenure and the size. Do a detailed breakdown.
And what telling the success it achieved.
Shall I answer that? I think it's fair to say that we are not meeting demand because demand is growing exponentially. You'll be aware, like many local authorities, that the council waiting lists are increasing because of all manners of factors, but that generally is for larger family-sized units. So despite our best efforts, despite negotiating hard with our development partners, and despite the council having its own housing programme, the factual position is that we cannot keep up with demand, and I think that will be a case across London, particularly, and dare say across most of local authorities in England.
Just thinking now about, come back to my question about the effectiveness of Part E. The policy says the appropriate mix should be established on a case-by-case basis, having regard to the site's location, character, nature and scale of development proposed, along with things the need for family housing, reasonable proportion of family units. Is there a danger that the need for family housing could be in those negotiations on a case-by-case basis without taking a more prescriptive approach, same way you have for affordable housing? Is there a danger that the need for family housing is kind of watered down in those negotiations, if you like? How effective is written if it's going to be negotiated on a case?
I mean, once again, it's an established policy. It's a policy that has been in place for many years now. We do negotiate on a case-by-case basis. I would say that it is an established policy across London, and we continue to work with our development partners to try to provide the housing that our needs.
I mean, if you left your Toblerone up there.
I mean, I think it's just worth observing that as there's always going to be an interaction in these negotiations between viability and particular types of housing provision. And in a sense, you might end up with two sides of the same coin. If you have a more prescriptive policy, when you look at the end result, there may be no difference because you end up in a series of negotiations based upon viability. So inevitably, if it's overly prescriptive, it has the effect of simply producing a different style of negotiation, which arrives at the same result, because the viability considerations cause a particular prescriptive policy requirement to have to be watered down on a case-by-case basis, reasons of viability considerations. I think it's pretty fair to say that the council's approach is simply to do it the other way round and actually to negotiate on that case-by-case basis with a stated set of objectives which developers can know they're going to be faced with in order to get to an end result.
I guess I was wondering whether it might put the council in a stronger position to have a more definitive policy, and for the developer then to create an alternative needs to be based on. That's to explore.
I mean, I think the view that the council has taken is on a tried and
absolutely
basis.
I mean, I'm there at the table negotiating with our developers, and I would concur. I think it would put the council in a strong position negotiating on affordable housing percentages and that viability that is where the acute need is in terms of genuinely affordable housing for our residents and future residents, particularly the kind of family housing. So I think a more prescriptive mix, I think, could have, you know, again, the kind of adverse consequences of reducing affordable housing and reducing family-sized affordable housing that
just thinking about what the policy is trying to achieve, is that something you feel that the family-sized units are more likely to be delivered by the RSL necessarily rather than the private sector?
I mean, again, it will be on a case-by-case basis. We do have family-sized units being delivered by private family-sized units delivered by our private developers, likewise by our RSLs and the council. Again, I think.
In terms of the negotiations, what is the starting point? The SHMA is obviously at a borough level. There'll be evidence, you know, in terms of waiting lists and things as well, at a local level, in wards, etc. How does the council start off negotiating in terms of the dwelling?
I mean, clearly the position is that we have a clear and definitive dwelling mix for the affordable housing, and we have a flexible approach, or a more flexible approach, for the private mix. But again, it's very difficult to say because, you know, as I've explained, on a case-by-case basis, the starting point may be entirely different for a site down in the south of the borough, for example, which is characterised by lower density, etc., versus a site allocation or location in Lewisham shopping centre, Lewisham town centre, for example. Again, it's related to public transport accessibility, the densities that we're trying to achieve in terms of practical sense, viability. So there's quite a lot of factors playing with that appropriate mix that we explore through the pre-application process before.
Okay, thank you. It's helpful to know how those negotiations take place and what your starting point is in terms of the operation of the policy. Just in terms of the other side of the equation, in terms of Part F and the approach to one-bedroomed properties, can the council just sort of explain the approach to that and what it's?
Yes, I guess this is the flip side of the argument that we've been discussing in terms of appropriate mix. And again, you know, what we're trying to achieve is, again, through the negotiations with our development partners, where we're seeing, you know, considerable concentration of one-bedroom apartments or two-bedroom apartments, then, you know, they have to be supported and located in areas which are suitable for those two-bedroom apartments. So have high public transport accessibility, are close to services and facilities, etc. So that is what Part F is trying to achieve and accommodate. And I guess it's also conversely to suggest that where we have areas that do not meet those kind of requirements, then those might be opportunities for larger family-sized units, housing, for example, etc. So it's sort of the opposite side of the coin in terms of the argument and discussion
developers.
Okay, thank you. And just looking at the criteria, I think some are probably easier to measure than others in terms of the public transport accessibility. One question I did have, and it's kind of with my Section 78 hat on, you know, if I were to receive an appeal and have to consider an appeal on a, you know, similar issue, how would the overconcentration of one test, you know, I can see where the council's coming from, but equally I think that would be quite hard to grapple with in terms of, you know, making a decision on an application. You know, what are the factors that would be taken into account in assessing an overconcentration? You know, where are those parameters to guide the decision?
I think it is a good question, and I think in practical terms, again, through the negotiations, we don't particularly see a kind of issue with this. You know, we don't often see developers, or we don't see developers coming in with, say, 90% one beds and studio flats, because we would push back on that. We, you know, we have a very good working relationship, and we with our development partners, and we also they also know that we are looking for mixed and balanced communities. So there is no definitive threshold within the plan per se. You know, again, on a site-by-site basis. Come in here.
Just wanted to mention that this is a policy. This is a policy that was introduced into our development management local plan in 2014, and it's been in place since then, so it's not a new policy in this plan. We have found it to be successful in working through our negotiations with developers, hence the reason why we've continued.
In tests, though, you obviously say you've got a good working relationship with developers. Have you had a case where developers back, for example? How have you asked them? Right, there isn't an overconcentration of how have you assessed that overconcentration aspect?
Like I'm struggling to think of a particular example. You know, again, the process by which we the development management process and the working relationship we have with our development partners means that there is extensive pre-application discussions prior to an application going in. And generally speaking, when we're working with our development industry partners, there is a recognition from their side that obviously we want a mixed and balanced communities, and by and large the development industry want that too, because it's a more successful product and higher quality. So I can't think of an example, a particular example, where we've had to formally test this. Clearly, there's a kind of starting point with the mix of affordable housing. Yes, it would be on a case-by-case basis and negotiation.
Looking to see whether there is anything in the supporting text which might help to clarify, just to give more effective guidance in terms of how it would be assessed.
The relevant text is paragraph 7.10. Doesn't take the matter further on this issue of overconcentration.
Okay, thank you. I've heard what the council has to say, and I consider that deliberations. I don't want to dwell on that too much in terms of the fact we've got quite a lot to get through. Just moving on to other aspects of the policy. Part E, if everyone are trying to get there. Part EE encourages developers and agents to market new housing units for sale or rent to existing local residents, local connection before advertising widely. And I guess there are a couple of questions there, aren't there, in terms of the fact that, as the council mentioned the other day, that the SHMA, the London SHMA, sees London as a single market, single housing market. Council flagged up to me yesterday, I think it was. So I think there's a question there in terms of whether that approach can be justified within the context of looking at a single housing market. But my other questions really relate to, well, how would that be actually practically assessed?
I'm sorry, could you give that reference again, because it doesn't seem to correlate with the text I've got in front of me. H01EE. Thank you.
GE, it's the criteria which encourages developers agents to market new housing units for sale or rent to existing local residents, people with a local connection before advertising widely to others. And I'm just throwing back what was pointed out to me yesterday by the council about London single housing market and how that approach would work.
Yeah, obviously the council recognises that that London is a single market, and there will be residents from other boroughs making Lewisham their home. I think this is in recognition that we also have, existing population that we would want to see and want to have the opportunity to purchase new homes within the new development that we are proposing, and that is why we've used the text quite carefully in terms of encourage developers, and then we'd expect developers to provide information on how they would meet that through the design and access statement, through the application process.
Yeah, I guess it's how effective policy will be. That's the purpose, the intention behind what the council is seeking to achieve. How effective would be to encourage, and I think, as you say, you've been quite careful with the use of those words, given the context of London being a single housing market area. But in terms of providing certainty to developers and in terms of the effectiveness of the policy, I could see where developers may struggle with that in terms of knowing where they stand in relation to that particular aspect, notwithstanding the potential difficulties in actually implementing that.
I guess, we recognise the challenges. What I would say is that we haven't had any, as far as I'm aware, any particular challenge to that policy from our, in terms of the regulation 18 or 19 consultation.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean to say it's the correct approach. But if you haven't had a challenge, that, it's obviously something I need to be clear on, and it comes down to the effectiveness test in terms of soundness. I think how effective that will actually be in providing guidance to developers. And just in terms of being able to implement that, how does the council approach that in terms, actually in a live case?
I think we'd have to consider that through the monitoring framework that we have, and report that through the AMR. Clearly, on a multi-phase scheme, it is an easier approach because there will be a kind of sequencing of delivery, a sequencing of occupation through the kind of development and an ongoing relationship with those developers. So that could be, or it would be much easier through those kind of larger site allocations versus the kind of one-off site that is complete overall. And I acknowledge that there may be some challenges in monitoring that.
Yeah, I'm not sure you quite answered my question there in terms of how, what mechanism would you use to get, it's a concept you use probably more in terms of affordable housing, isn't it? But presumably that applies to market housing as well. What mechanism would you use? It would be via 106. How would you actually secure that objective in terms of marketing to the local residents? How would that be secured through the planning system?
I'm not sure I've anything else to add. I can give that some thought and come back to the inspectors, but at the moment I don't have the details on how we would monitor.
It's not just monitoring, is it? It's how you'd implement it through the development management system. Would it be done by six obligation, for example, in order to secure that? Normally, I'm just trying to get to the bottom of how it would operate. Actually,
Again, I don't have the details at the moment. I'd have to go away and consider that.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a particular point you wish to raise in relation to this? Just a reminder to make sure you relate back to your original representative.
It was just a very quick one on this. I mean, it is quite a common one across. Usually it is a planning conditional Section 106 requirement, which will require you to submit a marketing plan that demonstrates how you comply with the policy. So from our perspective, the policy wording is pretty clear. And then that plan is sort of the site-specific interpretation of that, which you will then need to get that plan approved under the relevant planning conditional Section 106 requirement. I think from our perspective, it is sort of fairly clear to put into place.
Okay, thank you. And other cases where, the use of the word encourage, are there cases where it doesn't happen, for whatever reason, if there's any pushback from developers for it?
Well, I think we don't have this particular component of this policy in place at the moment. Obviously, this is new to this local plan. Obviously, helpfully, the marketing strategy could and would be a helpful monitoring tool. I think we have used the word encouraged quite carefully, again, not to be too prescriptive, again, because we felt that could be open to challenge. It is a kind of aspiration and ambition of the kind of council and the policy, but again, we haven't had any challenge from our development partners on that.
And if I might just observe, Ma'am, the House Builder Federation representation is greatly overstated in this regard. It rails against restricting sales to people who live outside of the borough. Well, that's not what this does at all. Yeah, a policy of encouragement. In terms of, I appreciate you're doing your own independent scrutiny, but as I said before, there's some merit in seeing what others have said, and the House Builders Federation are over the top in what they.
Thank you. There was just checking my notes there, just missed a point actually in relation to part F. If you don't mind just recapping back to part F and the issue of one-bedroom properties. I had missed an aspect there in my eagerness to keep the agenda going. This just a point, it has been raised, so you know I do want to explore it in terms of the HBF's point about unnecessarily restricting location of studio and one-bed flats outside of ETL 3 to 6 areas, in the sense that you know that they point out the London plan doesn't preclude housing development beyond those areas. 3 to 6 areas. So I'd just like to hear the council's view.
Yes, I think what we're not doing is restricting 1 and 2 beds within those areas below PTAL 3. The point here is the over-concentration of those, and that's simply because we know from experience that 1 and 2 bed and studios are the demographic that make up and occupy those are likely to be reliant on reliant on public transport, local facilities and services. So it seemed like a sensible approach to us. Again, one which we are working with our partners through the development management process on as well. So yes, it's, again, the key word is over-concentration. What we're not doing is saying that it's an absolute ban on 1 and 2 beds within those areas, PTEL 1 to 2, and indeed, have approved schemes which have those types of accommodation within those areas. But it's about over-concentration, and again, it's about a case-by-case basis. Again, the suitability of 1 and 2 bed and studios within, for example, a site within an opportunity area which has public transport improvements scheduled for it as part of a comprehensive master plan which includes facilities and services, an entirely different prospects than a site to the south of the borough within the kind of suburban context in PTEL 1 and 2 with none of those services.
And I think it's got to be read in the context of the first paragraph of that part of the policy, so that restriction, if better term, is set within the context of development proposals comprising solely of studios, and I think it's got to be read in that context, hasn't it? As you say, it's not a blanket ban as such. But I just wanted to give you the opportunity to address that. Okay, thank you. Just moving through the agenda, and I'd included build for rent slightly separately to affordable housing because it seems to be quite a bespoke product, but it's set out in the London plan under policy H11. I suppose that there is a question: does this policy add anything to H11? But essentially, it really cross-references, doesn't it, to the London Plan approach, which sets out quite a detailed criteria-based approach. But I just wanted to, I had it on the agenda just in case points, but it's not something, given the London plan approach, it's not something I really wanted to dwell on. So it's just really if there are any particular points the council wish to raise on that.
Just really a marker to refer developers to the relevant policy, save them looking at it.
Excuse us for a moment. We are trying to keep track. I have asked the council to vote on this whilst leading the discussion, trying to also keep track on whether there are any modifications to policy HO1, because obviously we have a revised set of modifications, so we're just double checking to see if there are any modifications which relate to those particular points we've raised. Given the discussion yesterday, there are modifications. Modifications were proposed to the dwelling numbers, reflecting the revised trajectory, but obviously they're going to change potentially again. So we'll come back to those, I think, at some point. But I was just, if the council could flag up to ourselves if there are any other modifications in relation to the matters that we've discussed, probably easier to deal with them in relation to that aspect. I think the first one, but we're dealing with that separately. First one's probably in relation to affordable housing, so we'll come on to that. But if you could just keep us right on that.
Yep.
Well, thank you. Colleague will give me a nudge as well. Okay, thank you. So moving on from build to rent and getting into the meat and bones, if you like, of the affordable housing policy. So I've asked that the overarching policy question in terms of what is the evidence in relation to affordable housing and what does it show. Now, I'm not going to necessarily, given time constraints, I'm not necessarily going to ask you to go through all of that. You do cross-reference to the SHMA in your evidence. Now, I think one of the issues I wanted to explore is the affordable housing need, the evidence in the SHMA in terms of affordable housing need. Which I have, and please do correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just trying to expedite matters, save you having to take me through the SHMA evidence. The gross and net annual need set out in table B7, B3. There are various tables in the SHMA, but just to expedite matters, the total annual net need for affordable housing, my understanding, is 2,818 dwellings per annum if met over a 20-year period, and 1,615 dwellings per annum. 2,818 met over a 15-year period, and 1,615 dwellings per annum over a 20-year period. That was my understanding from SHMA.
Correct.
So, bearing that in mind, we'll move on to the target, the affordable housing target of 50% in a moment. In terms of past trends in delivering affordable housing, you know, what does the evidence show, bearing in mind that the need that the SHMA has identified? How successful has the council been in delivering affordable housing in the past?
I can pick that up. In our response to the MIQ 5.5, we provided a breakdown of the percentage of affordable units completed from 2011-12 to 2022-23. The percentage varies pretty significantly from 8% to 47%. In 2011-12, 47%, 2012-13, 31%, etc., etc. So yes, it does vary and fluctuate depending on the rate of delivery in any one year, and also in terms of completions, etc., and schemes that we've got being approved there. The council recently has committed to a council housing building programme to try to elevate that figure. But the council acknowledges that this is a challenge and a challenge across London. Hence the need for the 50% target. It is a high target, but the identified need supports that, as you pointed out, and we feel it's absolutely essential to have that high target, but recognise that that is a strategic target. And again, the negotiations are on a site-by-site basis, subject to viability. It is a target, obviously, that reflects the London Plan position, and it reflects every London local plan adopted or otherwise that I know of. And it is something that we feel very, very strongly about. It's also worth saying that it is a continuation of our core strategy policy with the 50% target. As I said, the percentage of units completed does fluctuate, but it does represent a range from the 8%, which I have to say is a one-off, right up to the 47%, which was delivered in 2012.
Thank you. So coming back to the target, I hear what you say about the London Plan target and it reflecting the London Plan 50% target. The council does have its own SHMA. And I suppose, I was reading the SHMA and I was struggling to see where the target, if there was a recommendation, a specific recommendation for Lewisham to have a 50% target. Clearly the affordable housing need, depending whether it's met over a 15 or 20-year period, either is almost the annual target or significantly exceeds the annual overall housing target. In terms of setting a target on that basis, it depends on the factors you take into account, but in theory it could be anywhere from between 0 to, I don't know, 80, 90%, given the need. So how was that specific 50% arrived at? What evidence was looked at to set the target at 50%? Is it something that the viability assessment, for example, looked at in terms of, well, what's achievable viability terms? Has that 50% come from the appraisal? I'm just trying to get to the bottom of where that 50% has come from, and specifically, really, whether it's appropriate for Lewisham.
I'm not exactly sure specifically on the paragraph where it says this, but the SHMA did look at local affordable need. It came up with a figure. It recognised that we do work within the London Plan system, and that taking a pragmatic approach, even though we do have very significant need, we felt that the higher target than 50% above the London Plan not be implementable anyway, and that they felt that being consistent with the London Plan would be a realistic pragmatic approach to take.
Where in the schma that discussion or debate is
Paragraph 5.23.
page is that on?
Page 86. This is talking about CPG, which it does quote, is that the total affordable housing need can then be considered in the context of likely delivery as a proportion of mixed market and affordable housing developments, taken into account the probable percentage of affordable housing to be delivered by eligible market housing-led developments. An increase in the total affordable housing figures included in the plan may need to be considered where it could help deliver the required number of. Then the next paragraph goes on to say that London plan strategic target of 50%. Council already seeks to deliver the amount.
Necessarily make a recommendation per se on the it may need back to the
that's good. I think what it was also saying is that we would be would not be a good idea to go below the 50% target.
And in terms of we have a separate session on this, but in terms of the viability assessment, what does that tell you in terms of that 50% target and how deliverable?
The viability assessment work both looked at some strategic site allocations and also typical typologies of sites which will be delivered in the borough, and tested a range of options looking at the percentage of affordable housing. Some sites are viable, some sites are not viable, and again, that is the kind of reality that we see on the ground and through negotiations. Obviously, there is mechanisms to boost affordable percentages within schemes, which the council implements regularly, grant funding, etc., from the GLA. Also, the council acting as the RP on schemes, which we are increasingly doing. And what we see is that, again, some schemes come forward entirely 100% affordable, and some schemes fall below the 35% threshold and are viability tested. That isn't a kind of uncommon situation. Curiously, at the moment, in terms of viability, affordable housing with the grant is often more affordable at the moment than market sales. So, that is why we've set the 50% strategic target, and obviously we have the threshold approach, which is established within the London plan. But the backstop is that, again, the NPPF, this is viability tested as well.
Just to observe as a point of reference, if you go to the executive summary of the SHMA, page 9, it does say the council have a 50% affordable housing target, which is appropriate given the given the acute need for affordable housing, but this needs to be balanced with an ongoing need to deliver market housing. So it may not be in the detailed textual analysis, but the endorsement of 50% is there in the SHMA and the executive.
In the interests of being helpful to the examination, I would perhaps refer inspectors to document EB17, which provides a useful summary on this issue and indeed many of the issues we are likely to be discussing under its paragraph 1.7 key findings.
Just remind me what EB17 is. I don't have an encyclopedia.
My apologies, Inspector Malloy. That EB17 is the housing viability assessment work that's been undertaken by the Council.
What was the specific reference within that study?
It's a useful series of bullet points headlined under key findings, paragraph 1.7. That's page 3 onwards. The viability assessment gives considerable consideration. That's not poor English. Considerable consideration to the issue of affordability.
Okay, I'm not here to test. I'm just going to that document. Yeah, it's that first bullet point, isn't it, under key findings, in terms of that, you know, they don't recommend a particular kind of target and a scheme in terms of liabilities that schemes can do. It needs to take site-specific circumstance referencing. Okay, thank you. Just moving on now to this point in relation to question 5.7 of the MIQs and what is meant by genuinely affordable housing. You know, where is that defined? And you know that there are definitions, aren't there, in the glossary to the MPPF. So it's really how, you know, what does that actually mean?
So Part E of Policy HO03 defines genuinely affordable housing as social rent or London affordable rent. And Annex 2, the glossary, also provides a definition under genuinely affordable housing. Furthermore, paragraph 7.24 the local plan recognises the local definition of genuinely affordable housing. In Lewisham, this means that housing of social rent levels or the Greater London Authority's London affordable rent level.
Thank you. And that I believe there is a modification proposed to include a footnote to footnote of policy HO1, which was going to be repeated in relation to HO3. Yes, I think it is. In terms of just explaining more carefully what genuinely affordable housing actually.
Yes, that certainly is the case, and that's what I was about to hopefully helpfully point out.
Is it a term referred to in the London plan? 'Cause I know it is referred to in other London borough plans, isn't it? A London thing.
Yes, the London plan policy refers to genuinely affordable housing in the 50% target. As I recall, the genuinely affordable definition also includes London living rent, which is not recognised by Lewisham as part of our genuinely affordable housing because of the evidence that the SHMA brought to fore. As Angela helpfully pointed out, in terms of affordability, the only products that are genuinely affordable for Lewisham residents are those at social rent level or London affordable rent level.
Largely just due to the ratio of income levels, house prices, essentially.
Yes, that's correct.
Also, just to point out that this is a very important matter for members, for our council, and we do monitor this in detail. We do look at the actual tenures, provide percentages in each of our annual monitoring reports each year. We are taking a very close look at this matter.
And just seeing as you've raised that issue in relation to rent product, if you like, and in terms of conformity issue, which John has the GLA raised that in particular, given that the definition varies slightly to.
No, there's no issues of general conformity being raised, no issues or concerns at all relating to the matter.
I didn't have a particular issue with the suggested modification, but obviously that's something in our discussions on the modifications we'll look at in more detail. Okay, I'm just moving on to question 5.8. We've touched on how the 50% target's been arrived at. Clearly, the London plan has this approach of the threshold approach with 35%, whereby if that threshold is met, then the developer doesn't put in viability evidence. And I suppose my question was, and coming back to effectiveness, how will that 50% target be achieved? With that threshold approach, is it not a case that developers will just come in at the lowest common denominator?
Two things, just to note that it is a strategic target across all sites, and clearly the council and our registered providers as well, who are and our house builders, social registered landlords, are also developing within the borough, quite often at 100% affordable housing on sites. It's also the case that we work closely with our development industry partners to see how we can push above that 35%. It's a conversation that we are often having. That might involve grant funding through the GLA. It might involve the council being directly involved as the RP to push that up to 40, 45% affordable housing. On some schemes, it will be 35%, and the developers are not required to put in viability evidence by the London plan. That is factually accurate. And there will be some cases that are have particular constraints and financial or viability issues that will be under that. So that 50% target is a strategic target. It is an ambitious target, but it is one that we strongly feel is a workable target. It is a target that is in place now and is working effectively. And as I said, it's in place in the London plan and across all London Borough plans.
And given the, I asked a question earlier about the council's effectiveness in the past in terms of meeting that target. Is the approach effective in securing in achieving that overall target, looking at the past rewrites?
I mean, again, I would acknowledge that it is a challenge because of viability issues and constraints, etc. But nevertheless, we think it's an appropriate and robust target to aim for. We are putting in steps in place, including the council home building programme, which has I think we've the fourth year through that process, but we are stepping that up. We are working more closely with our RPs and social housing landlords to try to accelerate affordable housing. There has been a general kind of uptick across London in terms of affordable housing with the London plan policies in place, the 50% and the 35% threshold. So yes, whilst year on year there is fluctuation, I think the council would be very concerned if that 50% target was not in a plan. And just to reiterate a point that Angela made, this is a very strong political matter for the council. And we'd have to consider, if there was any major modification, the council would have to consider what that means for the plan.
I mean, I have to say, Ma'am, it's I think impossible to overstate the importance of the fact that this is effectively the same model that's adopted by the London plan. That the notion of using the 50% strategic target as a lever to bring up the percentages in applications whilst they're running in tandem with the sort of stick and carrot approach of the threshold. That's the adopted approach in the London plan, and it's really important to appreciate that whatever one thinks about that and whatever theoretical questions there may be about effectiveness, that's the approach that's been adopted and approved in the London plan.
I appreciate that. I suppose I'm just exploring whether that approach works. Lewisham.
It'd be a fairly bold step, I would respectfully submit, to sort of go behind that plan, which is obviously intended by across London boroughs, try and identify something specific about Lewisham that suggests that it won't work. Generic considerations that you've pointed to presumably apply elsewhere in London. Nevertheless, the whole of London is subject to that approach in the London plan.
I mean, just to come in there, obviously I don't want to talk for my colleagues at the GLA, but I'm pretty sure that we would have an issue of general conformity if that figure was reduced in any way. I'd also like to sort of raise the point and just say that the inference that this policy somehow stifles development in Lewisham, as implied by the HBF written statement, is not actually substantiated by any submitted evidence. And indeed, I'd point to the evidence of on-the-ground delivery in Lewisham since the adoption of the core strategy, with over 12,600 homes being built in a 10-year period. And obviously further to this, which we discussed previously, we have several thousand new home planning approvals or resolutions to grant approval waiting to be built. So, we think this policy is effective. We think it's essential because of the acute need of housing. We think it's essential to set it at 50% because, in terms of securing that general conformity issue. But I really want to stress that this is not a policy that is stifling development and planning applications to the Council.
Seeing how much time before the interval, that there are a couple of points which I think we can probably expedite. I think we've probably touched on in relation to the proposed 10-year split set out in Part E B of Policy H03. I think that obviously reflects the evidence in the schma from my reading, so I'm not to go there. I was just reading that aspect there, given what you said about London living rent. I mean, obviously in the context of that policy, it is included, it is referenced in that policy, but in the context of intermediate, the categorisation of genuinely affordable.
That's correct, yes.
Clarify that, given what you said. Just looking at my next question, then in relation to the threshold approach to viability set out in F of the policy, and in particular the thresholds set out under criteria A to C, those are from the...
Yes.
Looking for opportunities to save a little bit of time here. In relation to question 5.11 and viability tested route, that obviously comes from the London plan as well, doesn't it? Are there any differences in approach between the London plan and the Council's approach, just to draw to my attention? I need to discuss.
No.
And I think we've covered the question. That's a repetitive question now in terms of the target units on housing. Just looking at what we have left on the agenda, I think there will be more of a discussion in relation to the requirement for affordable housing on small sites. And obviously we have representatives here in terms of some of the other items on the agenda. So I think it would be a good time now to adjourn for a break. I am conscious, I think we said half-hour break initially, and in my eagerness to carry on, I've been having 15-minute breaks, but I am more than happy to take views from the Council in terms of whether they feel they need a longer comfort break, 20 minutes, if 30 minutes, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, 20 would be good. Is that okay?
Minutes gives us just... We shall adjourn it to 11:20.